And a guy that knows a thing or two about mock drafts, that is our Ryan Wilson. Let's bring him in to talk about the Texans and the Bears. Ryan's both eliminated from the playoffs over the weekend. We got 4 regular season NFL games that are left, but are these teams already looking ahead and preparing for the draft, preparing for next season at this point?
Right, so they're doing that, and the scouts have pretty much wrapped up all their work in the fall in terms of traveling around the country watching these teams. But now it starts to get kicked up to the front office. The general manager starts to get involved, and they're also trying to figure out what they have going forward in terms of the expiring contracts, the young players, that they're trying to see what they have in those guys, whether they're going to have roster spots and what that depth chart will look like going forward. So there's zero concern about preparing for the playoffs because that ain't happening, but there is a lot of focus now on the draft-eligible players. We're learning every day about players coming out, transfer portal guys. You just talked about JT Daniels there. And then, of course, preparing for the pre-draft process with the bowl seasons and then the Senior Bowl, Shrine Bowl, and all that. So there's a lot to do. And when you're a bad football team like the Texans and the Bears, unlike the Texans, do have a franchise quarterback, you're looking at every aspect of the organization to try and improve it. And for a lot of these teams not named Chicago at the top of this draft, quarterback is going to be the first point of conversation.
All right, let's talk about the Texans and the quarterback situation. And most of your mock drafts, Ryan, you got Houston taking a QB, number 1 there in the draft. Is that the direction you still think that they're heading? Obviously, with Davis Mills, it's just not really working out.
Yeah, Jacqueline, it's interesting that old Pete Prisco scurried off the set there because he was a huge Davis Mills supporter. He doesn't talk about Davis Mills so much anymore. Look, Davis was a third-round pick, and it was a speculative pick, no doubt about it. And there's a lot of upside with Davis Mills, but if you've been benched for Kyle Allen, it certainly doesn't feel like you're in the long-term plans. You see the draft needs here in terms of what Houston needs. This was put together by our guy Josh Edwards at CBSSports.com. QB is at the top of the list. Offensive line is at the top of the list. You need to protect that quarterback. The Texans have 2 first-round picks, Jacqueline, at number 1 and number 13 because of the Deshaun Watson trade. And you can see there, they have needs virtually everywhere. So it does start with quarterback for me. And then the question becomes, are the Texans going to be able to talk themselves into Bryce Young? He is my quarterback 1. He's also probably 5'10 and 185 by the time we get around to measuring and weighing him. And there's no other quarterback in human history that has been a first-round pick, had success, and been that short and weighed that little. Bryce Young is special. C.J. Stroud is also a really good football player. He's not quite where Bryce Young is. And then, of course, we can talk about the Will Levises and Anthony Richardsons of the world. But if you're picking first overall, I'm taking Bryce Young if I'm the Houston Texans because without a quarterback, you're just a football team. And as this current team sits here, they don't have any chance of going to the playoffs because they don't have a quarterback. Other options, however, if perhaps you're going to think at 13 of getting a quarterback if you're the Texans, Will Anderson, that's a layup. It's like drafting Chase Young when he was coming out or Bosa brother, pick whichever one you want, when they were coming out. You can plug him in and they'll play immediately. Chase Young's been hurt, of course. When he's healthy, he was really, really good. And, of course, Jalen Carter is in a similar boat. He doesn't play edge rusher. He's a defensive tackle. Might end up being the best defensive player on that Georgia team going back to last year when Georgia had 5 defensive players go in the first round.
All right, and one of the most recent ones, you're talking about this guy who's entering the draft on your podcast, Ryan. You're talking about Anthony Richardson, and he declared for the draft. I know that was maybe an option for you at QB for that 13 pick there for Texas. And for you, I'm surprised that you picked him because I heard earlier you were talking about when he first declared, that he might be the best fit for a team where he has to go and sit and kind of observe for a year or two. And it doesn't seem like Houston is, I don't know, maybe the right spot for that. I mean, if they do take Anthony Richardson, is that a place where he can just start right away? I don't know. I feel like there's 2 sides to that argument, Ryan.
If I didn't know any better, Jacqueline, I would say you're a torn Gators fan and you're ready to move on from the Anthony Richardson experience. And you know better than anyone, he can be absolutely electric and then he can be unbelievably frustrating. But you're exactly right. The Texans aren't a good fit. If we're going to talk about a good fit for a player like Anthony Richardson, perhaps the Buccaneers at the bottom of the first round, or even the Lions who have Jared Goff, and Jared Goff can certainly play for another few years on his contract while Anthony Richardson sits. On the podcast you talk about with the first pick that I do with Rick Spielman. Spielman compared Anthony Richardson to Malik Willis, and not in terms of size. Anthony is certainly much taller, but in terms of athleticism and lack of experience and how Willis shouldn't be playing this year for the Titans, and he hasn't. except for injury, and that's the case with Richardson. But if you're the Texans, you fall in love with Richardson, you think he's a special talent, and you can be patient. You can roll Davis Mills or Kyle Allen out there another year if you want to. While you try that patience, you might have something special on the back end. But the reality is, as you're sort of alluding to, there's going to be a lot of ups and downs on the roller coaster before you get to that point with Richardson. So if you take him early, you have to make sure you understand that he cannot be on the field right away.
And Ryan, I want to talk about the Bears. What do you think the Bears need and what they're going to be looking for? Are they going to continue to build around Justin Fields? And who do you think the best guy for the job is for that?
Right, so quarterback is set. There are some questions coming into the season. Well, let's see what we have in Justin Fields. He was mismanaged under Matt Nagy. I think that's a fair thing to say. And Luke Getsy, the offense coordinator, finally figured out the right recipe. So no concerns there. Everything else on the offense is wide open. Wide receiver, they traded for Chase Claypool. That pick's going to be a pretty high pick for the Steelers now as we currently sit here. Offensive line, Braxton Jones was a pleasant surprise as a rookie so far this year. But there are a ton of other needs. Roquan Smith, they traded away. They need help at linebacker as a result. In the middle of that defense, they need help. Robert Quinn, they traded away at edge rusher. So clearly there's space there to fix things. Now, they have the number 2 overall pick. And you don't want to take a wide receiver that high. Quentin Johnson might be in the conversation out of TCU, but that would be extremely high. Offensive tackle could be something you take there, but Olafashanu, my offensive tackle 1, is returning to Penn State. My offensive tackle number 2 is Peter Skoronski, and he's a guy who can play tackle. He'll probably play guard at some point. There are concerns about short arms, which is a thing that teams talk about with offensive tackles. But in order to do that, you're going to need to trade down maybe 8, 9, 10 spots, and then find a Peter Skoronski there, for example, perhaps get back that second-round pick that you gave to Pittsburgh, and then you can do something in terms of helping the offensive line. Other players to keep an eye on there, Jalen Carter, maybe he is a guy you feel good at taking at that spot. Will Anderson's going to be a layup. We just talked about him. And, of course, there are going to be guys like Miles Sanders if you trade down, another young edge rusher out of Clemson. Paris Johnson Jr. is another offensive tackle out of Ohio State who also has the ability to play inside. So there will be a ton of needs there, ton of opportunities there. It's just a matter of, do you want to sit put at number 2 and take a Will Anderson or Jalen Carter, or do you want to trade down, try to get some picks, and maybe get a wide receiver and an offensive lineman in the process?
All right, that is our NFL draft analyst Ryan Wilson joining us here on CBS Sports HQ. You can also hear Ryan alongside Rick Spielman on their brand new podcast, With the First Pick. In the latest episode, they're talking about the latest big names entering the draft. You can download and listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.